The offensive abilities of the Calgary Flames are trending to the bottom. And among the forward group, there is one big return that will change it.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Locked On Flames, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. The Flames are on a race to the bottom of the offensive standings, meaning the worst ranked offensive team in the National Hockey League. There's one big change that will help with that, and The Athletic has put out their best shot at the worst pick. They have the updated standings right now. How good is Calgary's chances of getting the number one pick in the 2026 NHL Draft? And a new segment that I'd like to start doing on Tuesdays. We go around the division and hear from Locked On hosts about the Pacific Division teams. We'll do that coming up later on in this edition of the show. My name is Ryan G. I am a lifelong play-by-play broadcaster and decades-long Flames fan ever since Calgary went up against Tampa Bay in the 2004 Stanley Cup Final, and Peter Marr, the Hall of Fame broadcaster, was the voice of my experience with that final. The Flames racing to the bottom. There's no active goal, no active assist, and therefore no active point streak right now for anyone on the Calgary Flames roster going into that game against Anaheim last Sunday. It has not been a consistent or dependable offensive season for Calgary so far this year. I even struggle to grasp the fact that Rasmus Andersson left Calgary when he was still third on the team in points behind Nazem Kadri and Mikael Backlund. And so clearly Calgary is in some deep trouble with the way that they're going to be able to score goals for the rest of the season. And while this directly ties into what we'll talk about in our second segment with how likely it is that Calgary will wind up with one of the best chances for the number one overall pick in the 26 draft, what frames it certainly is just the fact that Nazem Kadri's last goal for Calgary is in mid-January, over a week ago at this point. And granted, I know that Calgary hasn't had as many games this week scheduled as they did a week ago. In fact, some might argue, and I could definitely buy it, that this little break in the action is good for Calgary to not have a game until Thursday's matchup with the Wild. Jonathan Huberdeau broke a 10-game goalless streak by getting the first one against the Ducks on Sunday, but that further shows the point that a guy that you expect to be among your top three in goals scored, Jonathan Huberdeau, hasn't been that for Calgary this season. Kadri has been, and then hasn't scored a goal since the New Jersey game basically a week ago. You have Mikael Backlund, who 4 days earlier than that, while Calgary was still on its road trip, had his last goal as well. The Flames getting scoring against the Ducks. I mentioned Huberdeau. Matt Coronado, was nice to see him get one. And then Hunter Brustevitz, who had his first goal in the NHL. All of that's great and good. But at the end of the day, Calgary has been fairly inconsistent scoring over the last few games. The tail end of that home game stretch for Calgary at Scotiabank Saddledome that ended on Sunday. They'll trip out to Minnesota and then have 3 home games before the Olympic break. I bring all of that up to say that it feels like a lot of the issues for Calgary started when Blake Coleman ended up leaving. Blake Coleman needs to get back for Calgary to have any semblance of an offensive prowess toward the end of this season, because it's been proven that since he's been out, Calgary's offense has felt significantly stagnant. I mentioned Rasmus Andersson was cited by Mikael Backlund as part of the reason that Calgary might be struggling as a team scoring the puck. But outside of that, it feels like Blake Coleman might be part of the reason too, especially because he's such a spark when it comes to shorthanded goals. But right now, Calgary is right at the bottom of the goals per game standings this side of St. Louis. And with Coleman having 5 goals in his last 12 games or so, having a guy who can score once every other day, every other game on a team that's as bad as Calgary offensively certainly would be a welcome sight. And while the focus on this episode is not to give you an idea of when Blake is coming back, it's more so showing that I think Blake was part of the biggest reason Calgary had such an uptick when they were playing so well from the middle part of November until the end of December. And since he's been out of the lineup, it's not been as much fun to see Calgary play offensively. And granted, the Flames were in those losses in the early part of January where they fell 5-1 to Seattle, 4-1 to Montreal, 4-1 to Boston. Coleman was available, but since then, with him out of the lineup, it's been a lot tougher. So it feels like that's the only opportunity that Calgary is going to have to maybe bring some sparks to this team, because it doesn't seem like if Nazem Kadri was going to be the one, that it would have happened by now, right? If Mikael Backlund was going to continue that momentum he had going into the middle part of January, that's when his last goal was. He had the first back-to-back multi-goal games of his career, right? That felt like it was the turning point possibly for Backlund. And overall, even with Backlund not scoring, Coach Huska has cited Backlund line as being one of his favorite lines. And granted, you look at where Coleman is in that discussion too, certainly will help to have him back. But it's going to be interesting without Coleman in the lineup, how Calgary is going to be able to score. And for Team Tank, you certainly will want Calgary to continue to not be able to score so you can work your way down in the standings and have a better chance at that pick, which again, we'll explore that coming up shortly on this episode of Locked on Flames. Will Zayne Parekh help? He is due to end his conditioning stint with the Wranglers, and he talked about just that with AHL Wranglers on X.
Just keep getting better. I think that's kind of been the change in mindset for me over the last couple of weeks. Is maybe it's it's going to take a little bit for me to get my game in the NHL, but as long as I continue to get a little bit better each day, I mean, obviously I think I'm going to get there eventually, and it's going to take some time, but I just got to kind of trust in the process and have a little belief in myself, and that's starting to come. It's a lot of expectation and pressure sometimes, and I obviously try my best out there and try to do my best, but it's going to take some time. I'm not going to be the 30-goal guy I was in junior right away, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's nice to have the fans behind me, and it's a really passionate city to play in, and obviously a Canadian market, so it's a big deal to them.
Thank you, Zayne, for setting good expectations for us upon returning, that we're not going to see the guy who was dominating World Juniors unlike any Canadian defenseman had before. And I think it was wise for him to kind of share a little bit of a tempered expectation, because Calgary is so craved for some offensive sparks that I definitely think if he doesn't temper expectations, then that could get pretty frustrating for Flames fans potentially. The Athletic has a system for figuring out who is the most likely to earn the top pick in the upcoming NHL draft, and we'll get a quick look at where they think the Flames are in that conversation. That's when this episode of Locked on Flames rolls on. There is nothing like being near the ice during hockey season. The speed, the hits, the atmosphere, it is unmatched. Watching at home is great, but being in the building is a completely different experience. The only thing that used to get in the way was actually getting tickets. Long queues, endless screens, and prices changing at checkout. That's why the Game Time app gives the advantage back to the fans. It is the hack for unlocking amazing NHL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. I've used the Game Time app before. Priority fees are included, so immediately know upfront what you're going to pay. And the zone deals, so clutch. You choose the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Knowing your tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gives real peace of mind as well. Take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Thank you for making Locked on Flames your first listen every day. Thank you for making Locked on the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, please check out our Everydayer Club. You get access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Flames that's compatible with Apple Podcasts or Spotify, every other favorite podcast app you may use. It works right there. But the true coolness is getting access to the Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. That includes a group chat with listeners from this show, plus other shows across the Locked On Podcast Network. It is a place that I'm really excited to see what we can do with in the month of February and March with the show as we roll on through Q1 of 2026. So please check it out. Go to lockedonflames.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. The Athletic has the newest update to its best shot at the worst pick standings. That's what I'm going to call it. It also tells NHL fans if your team is going to make the playoffs, but I'm not so much worried about that. The percentage that it has Calgary getting the number 1 overall pick is 13%. Now that is almost 10% worse than where Vancouver sits right now at 22%, and just a couple of spots ahead of Chicago. A little bit of its algorithm basically takes the offensive rating and defensive rating for each player, and then they take that and combine it with a rating for each team based on the combined rating of those players, estimates how many goals they're expected to score and allow, and then assign a probability of how likely a team is to win with their current record, expected health, those kind of factors. And then they use that for game-by-game projections to simulate the rest of the season. And that includes the playoffs, too. So based on those current projections, Calgary has the second best chance at the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 NHL Draft. And so I have been doing the show for just under a couple months, and the first thing that comes to mind is Gavin McKenna. Gavin McKenna is going to be the number 1 overall pick, which means if Calgary doesn't get Gavin McKenna because Vancouver gets that slot and they're picking number 2, then maybe it's Ivar Stenberg. Well, according to Daily Faceoff, it looks like they're thinking Stenberg is now growing to be the consensus number 1 for the upcoming NHL Draft. And a lot of times, Calgary fans, if you're using sources like Reddit and some other places where you all can share your voices on who you think should be the first overall pick, it seems like there's a lot of excitement about Stenberg, and the synopsis remains this idea that McKenna has a higher ceiling, means his potential is possibly higher than where Stenberg is, but the starting point, the high floor, Stenberg brings that. And the Daily Faceoff saying most scouts would agree that McKenna has more pure skill. Stenberg has the ability to impact the game in more ways. So if Vancouver gets the number 1 overall pick, then that means the number 2 pick would potentially include McKenna. And right now, based on the projections from the Athletic, Calgary would be in that number 2 spot at 13%. In fact, right now, that's for the number 1 overall pick. Right now, Calgary has a 81% chance for a top 5 draft pick, whereas the Blues are sitting at 55%. Based on the projections, they think the Blues are actually going to get better than Calgary going forward. And coming into Tuesday's games, St. Louis is at 47 points, tied with Winnipeg, 1 below Calgary. They feel optimistic about the Jets going up the standings and the Blues doing likewise compared to that of the Flames. In fact, like I said, Chicago has a 69% chance at a top 5 draft pick compared to 81% for Calgary and 55% for the Blues. So if you're a Flames fan, the chances of you getting a top 3 pick are higher. Right now, the Athletic has Calgary listed as the number 2 pick, which means you'd have the opportunity to pick up Gavin McKenna if you choose to. Daily Faceoff did a mock draft that has the Blues picking McKenna at number 2, not in this case agreeing with the Athletic that the Flames would have the number 2 pick. And they say Calgary would be slotted for the number 3 pick and pick Tynan Lawrence, who is a centerman out of Boston U. So if that was the case, that means Calgary would be passing on Keaton Verhoff, who, from what I've seen sitting in this chair, the top 3 long has been Stenberg, McKenna, and Verhoff. It looks like Calgary may make an interesting choice by going with somebody who's playing in the forward space and going after someone who can play center as opposed to someone who's back on the defensive side, which in many ways makes a lot of sense, especially with Parekh, Brustevich. You have Kuznetsov. You have guys right now that are young. Calgary feels like it's pretty okay in a lot of ways around the defensive position, plus the emergence of Kevin Ball is likely Calgary's number 2 guy. Depending on what happens with Zach Whitecloud, Mackenzie Weegar remains number 1. It also gives you flexibility as there's opportunities to trade those guys down the road, that maybe having an extra young defenseman might make more sense. But imagine having another good center option if Lawrence is what the Daily Faceoff thinks he is going to be. And that's a place that the same reason that Nazem Kadri is appealing on the trade market, because centers are hard to find right now in the NHL. You might have somebody who could fill his spot or be an enhancement if Kadri ends up finishing his contract with Calgary. What are your thoughts? Who do you think Calgary would take if they had the number 3 pick? Because it seems like the idea of getting McKenna at number 2 for a team that struggles to score offense makes a lot of sense. But what if they have the number 3 pick? Let us know in the YouTube comments. I would certainly be interested in your thoughts. We are going to blaze through the Locked On Podcast Network across the landscape of Locked On NHL to go to a lot of the Pacific Division shows and get a take on where things stand right now as we go around the division next on this edition of Locked On Flames. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. It is awesome how simple Quo makes everything, because there's one shared business number. Nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, and it works right from phones and computers, so you can even keep up with your existing phone number. There's no reason to change. Quo also has smart AI tools that automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise. Quo is the number 1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's Quo, quo.com/lockedonnhl. Quo, no missed calls and no missed customers. Thanks for making Locked On Flames your first listen every day. Feel free to stay around on Thursday. We will have the dredge ahead, where we look for the next 5 games of Calgary Flames hockey. And on Wednesday's show, we'll get a glimpse into the matchup on Thursday between the Minnesota Wild hosting the Calgary Flames. Right now, we got to fly around the division. I want to have a chance to get an idea of what's going on elsewhere in the Pacific Division. We are going to start with the Vegas Golden Knights. They're taking on Montreal on Tuesday. Vegas comes into Tuesday's matchup tied with Edmonton at 62 points in the Pacific Division standings. They're 14-11-1 at home, but the Canadians so good when they get 3 or more goals. We send it over to Locked On VGK with Tony and Chris.
The Golden Knights goaltending has always been a product of what's in front of them. And that goes both ways, too. I mean, I've been very critical that any of the 17 goalies that the Golden Knights had on the 22-23 roster would have won the Stanley Cup in that playoff run. Well, is the product in front of them as good right now? I don't know. I mean, it's definitely not as good. I mean, Rasmus Anderson's just getting his feet wet with the team, learning the system and everything. Hanifin, we'll see if he's a beneficiary or not of this. And Shea Theodore is trying to, carry Lausanne with them, and that's not working.
Goaltending, the focus of that conversation there, and of course, Rasmus Andersson conversation to boot as well. But there you go. As good as the Canadians are when they score 3 goals or more, goaltending will be critical in preventing that from happening. And the Golden Knights almost just as good, 24, 5, and 7 when they post at least 3 goals. How about Edmonton beating Anaheim on Monday? Mattias Ekholm hat trick. Edmonton dominant. 7-4 victory over the Ducks. Here's Locked On Oilers host Nick.
You get contributions from guys who don't typically get on the stat sheet, so Connor Leon can exhale for not having 8 combined points between the two of them. Most importantly, you win 2 in a row, you score a lot of goals, you start to feel better about it. Tristan Jarry, who was not great tonight, did just enough to keep them in this game, and ultimately, you get the empty netters, you get to celebrate Ekholm with a hat trick, first of his career, later stages of his career. Someone who has had a bit of an up and down year, who was not great in the playoffs last year coming off of that injury. This is one you feel good about. This is one going into work Tuesday morning. You can smile as you watch the highlights and read the game stories or listen to this episode. So with all of that said, we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
Ducks end up coming away with a 4-2 win over the Seattle Kraken. And this win comes 2 days after the Ducks narrowly escaped the Colorado Avalanche with a shootout win thanks to Mikael Backlund and Cutter Gauthier scoring. Dostal had to stay super tall in net in that one as well. That game against the Avalanche, Lukas Dostal put up the second best goaltending performance of the season in the entire league against Colorado. So out of all the goaltending performances this entire season, out of the entire league, that was the second best goaltending performance analytically, numbers-wise, everything. Lukas Dostal standing as tall as you can in net for the Ducks. And it was kind of funny, even as the shootout ended, he was so locked in that he didn't even realize that the game was over. He thought there was one more shooter, and so he's like waiting for the shot, and he sees the guys coming on. He's like, no, go back. I don't want you to, we don't want the penalty or whatever. And the game was already over. So Gautier's like, hey, bro, we won. It's over, man. So he gets the W there.
I jumped you out of there from the Oilers to Locked On Ducks with Kyle because I wanted to make sure that we got the Ducks' perspective of how they were playing prior to their matchup with Edmonton. And that's one of the latest episodes of Locked On Ducks. We're going around the Pacific Division, and you can hear how exciting it was for Ducks fans before they had their 7-game win streak that included a matchup against Calgary snapped with Locked On Ducks. We are going around the Pacific Division as we will on Tuesdays going forward. San Jose and Vancouver coming up on Tuesday. Macklin Celebrini, a 2-goal performance against the New York Rangers. Sharks win 3-1 prior for the Sharks as they come to this matchup 6-4-0 in their last 10 games. The Canucks are just 1-9-0, that one win against the Washington Capitals. And we get some insight on the Sharks from host JD Young and Locked On Sharks.
Tyler Toffoli, who has quietly really got his game together, right? You go back to December where we kind of discussed like, man, it's been a little bit of a struggle here for Tyler Toffoli, like he wasn't scoring as much, just didn't really kind of seem as an effective player, right? He had 12 points last month in 14 games, which was, still third on the team, but just really didn't really kind of look like the same guy. Fast forward to this month, where Tyler Toffoli has really started to come along and has really kind of found his game for the San Jose Sharks. During this time, in the 10 games that the Sharks have played so far this month, he has 8 points, which is second on the team behind one Celebrini, Macklin, where he has 4 goals and 4 assists during that time.
So that's like Celebrini, Macklin. Like, we don't know who he is, JD. Killing my soul with how good the young talent is over there at San Jose. Calgary will see the Sharks on the other side of the Olympic break to break things out back in late February. And then a win against Vancouver would continue to help the Sharks secure that wild card spot. Right now, they have the same amount of points as the Kings and the Kraken at 55 apiece. But San Jose has only played 50. The Kings have played 50. The Kraken have played 51 so far. San Jose in as it stands right now because of the tiebreakers. They also have LA at Detroit on Tuesday. Red Wings ended up having a matchup with Winnipeg. Red Wings got a 5-1 victory in that one. Now 18-8-1 in home games. Kings 16-1-7 when scoring 3 or more goals, but just 4-2-4 in their last 10 versus the Red Wings right now at 8-1-1 in the last 10. And these teams have already played. Red Wings getting a 4-3 win in a shootout in their last matchup. Here is Locked On Kings host, Eddie.
Head coach Jim Hiller said after the game against the Blues that Edmondson was, quote, banged up, end quote, and was day-to-day. No word on when Turcotte was hurt, but he's been diagnosed with an upper body injury. He played 14 shifts, 14 minutes and 2 seconds in that game against St. Louis. And again, both Edmondson and Turcotte considered day-to-day. It's possible they could play Tuesday in Detroit against the Red Wings, but seems like pretty much almost every time this year when a Kings player has been day-to-day, they end up missing a few games. Also, Kings captain Anze Kopitar, who has missed the last 9 games with a lower body injury, did skate a little in practice on Monday, did not go through a full practice with the team, and was seen doing some kind of extra skating on his own. So also doesn't look like Anze Kopitar will be ready to go in the game against Detroit on Tuesday. So as a result of these latest injuries, particularly to Alex Turcotte, the Kings have called up a player, and that is center Kenny Connors from the Ontario Reign.
So there you go. Ontario Reign addressing some of the injury issues right now with the LA Kings, Locked On Kings with Eddie Garcia, and they'll be playing at Detroit on Tuesday. Washington's at Seattle on Tuesday. I don't have enough time to continue sharing some of the audio. We're going to send it over to Locked On Caps host Dan, but instead we'll just let you know that that's a matchup between 23-19-9 Seattle and 25-21-7 Washington. The Kraken right now, like I said, sitting on the outside looking in tiebreakers to try to get into the postseason. Washington is already 6 points back of the final wild card spot in the Eastern Conference, 25-21-7, Seattle at 23-19-9. What do you think going around the division? Let us know what you thought of that. One of the best parts about being in the hosting chair for Locked On Flames is I get to talk about Calgary, a team that I've watched 40 plus games for every single year for the last, 10, 15 years, ever since NHL TV became a thing. But now I get a chance to think about it more critically. I also get a chance to keep up with the division a little bit more than I have in the past. And even doing this roundup helps me hear from some of our other hosts and get those insights. So I certainly will continue to bring that to you on Tuesdays for the rest of the 2025-26 season. I always liked going around to different places. That was one of my favorite types of radio segments to do back in the radio days. And so hopefully bringing that here for the rest of the year. Big thanks to you for tuning in to this edition of Locked On Flames. Please subscribe and follow so you can get all of the latest episodes. We're going to talk more about Calgary and trying to get back into a little bit of an offensive swing of things and how good the defense can be anchoring things in net with Devin Cooley and Dustin Wolf. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Flames ad-free plus a members-only Discord so that you can connect with us. Find out more details at lockedonflames.supercast.com. For those of you on video, we invite you to stick around. We're going to send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. For those on audio, make your second listen NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL. My name is Ryan G. Thanks for having fun with us. Wishing you the best rest of your Tuesday that you can have with Locked On Flames.